I get to ask a few questions, and Elizabeth, I know that you need to leave us shortly, so please jump in if you want to answer this to start with. The first question is, how do Australians, and I mean David just touched on this a little bit, but how do Australians contribute, knowingly or not knowingly, to the crimes associated with forced organ harvesting in China?
I suppose by seeking transplants in China, I don't know, or by keeping quiet when they know something bad's happening.
I mean, I hear anecdotal stories. Yes, yes. I suppose I hear anecdotal stories, Elizabeth, people going overseas and having the organ transplants, and people tend not to think about where that organ has come from. I find that surprising, given that when I go to a doctor and they tell me that they're about to do some kind of medical procedure, I want to know every single thing about what's going to happen. I mean, is there something for people who are fairly desperate and needing that they don't want to ask these questions or don't think about it?
Yes, well, I wouldn't leave it solely to the patients who are not necessarily thinking in terms of public policy. And in a more general way, I think if Australia is not going to be contributing to this problem, they have to take active stances against it. I mean, I don't think there's any coincidence that David SHOEBRIDGE is hosting this event, because he's the person who's done most in terms of advancing legislation in this area. And I think we need the type of legislation he's been proposing in this state, in all states, and federally. And we need much more of a public stance. There are now 13 countries in the world that have enacted extraterritorial legislation. We need more than that, and Australia should be one of them.
Yes, I agree. How do you think, and anyone on the panel can jump in, I mean, how do you think the media can contribute to ending these crimes in Australia? We have some media here in the audience tonight, but I mean, coming into work this morning and seeing the front pages with the 400-page leaked document, you know, it kind of shows you the strength. But unfortunately, China doesn't let the media in. So, I mean, how can the media in Australia be doing anything more to help contribute to ending these crimes?
I think they can. The problem is that oftentimes when stuff is exposed, like in the case of Cotton On and Target, getting that cotton from the Xinjiang region where the Muslim minority is forced to get that cotton, then obviously that has already occurred. So it's hard to sort of get beyond that and expose something like a lot sooner in order to sort of embarrass companies, which is what's currently happening. It's the embarrassment that's making companies change their behavior, which is good, but it's always after the fact. So that's sort of the troubling way of exposing it via the media, I suppose. Yeah.
Carolyn, did you want to say something? Or Wendy? Yep, Wendy can jump in next. Yep.
Yeah, I think the media has an absolutely crucial role, because they have the platform that can reach large masses of people. First of all, they need to understand what slavery is and what this abuse is, so that they are reporting it in a way that actually names it for what it is and doesn't polish it. And I think I mean, we live in a society where we don't ask questions about where much of what we consume comes from. We don't ask questions about the clothes we're wearing, the food we eat, the electronics that we're currently using. And so this kind of follows suit, but we have to change that mindset that somehow us getting what we want is going to make us happier or healthier or somehow fulfill our lives.
Thank you. Before I move, I would like to please thank Elizabeth, EVATT, AC. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for joining us. Wendy, did you want to make a comment on that?
Yes, I think this problem, the issue of forced organ harvesting in China, is challenging for the media because it's been going on since 1999, possibly 1998, and it's still going on. There are very few witnesses who are able to come forward, who have been exposed to the kinds of events that we've heard about tonight. Of course, there are no witnesses who have had their organs harvested because they're all dead. There are no witnesses because other witnesses because they're the perpetrators, and they either face criminal and other sanctions, or their lives would be in threat if they left China and tried to become whistleblowers, or their families and loved ones left behind would be. So it's a challenge for them. I think it is a challenge for the media, and I think it'd be fabulous for the media to be creative in thinking of ways how can we showcase this story, which is complicated and which is horrible and which concerns things that people don't want to think about. How can we actually communicate it in meaningful ways that will have traction with our politicians? And I think ETAC would certainly be very happy to work with the media on that.
Thanks, Wendy. I mean, you've touched on this a little bit about barriers and challenges, but I'm just wondering if there's anyone else on the panel that wants to make a comment about, you know, what are some of the barriers to progress the issue in Australia? Yes,
Well,
Martin.
Talking from a sort of university perspective, I think a lot of the universities now see China and other overseas countries as, let's say, you know, potential growth markets. That's how we talk about students are clients now, that sort of thing. So whenever there's any sort of research money coming from a country like China, I think too few questions are being asked. And we've seen that with UTS as well, where if there is money coming from a state-owned company that, you know, wants to develop surveillance technology that might be used to monitor certain, you know, parts of the population, etc., then there are too few questions are being asked. And I think that, so it's basically a financial incentive there, which I think is a bit of a barrier there in asking tough questions, because it might stimulate the flow of money coming from China. Yeah.
Okay. Did anybody else want to comment? I know, Maria, you had talked a little bit about that. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I think part of the problem is that I think people in Australia feel that they're not really involved because they're not actively doing something that's bad. They're just not doing enough to react to when they see the bad. And I think that would be, for example, if you look at the survey of the nephrologists, I mean, half of them had seen somebody who went to China for an organ. Half of them had discussed going to China for an organ, but not one of them said, you know, oh, and I told him not to do it because it might be unethical. They basically didn't feel that they were responsible for the evil that was going on, even though they were, you know, they were literally complicit in it, as David said. And so I think in educating people that just not doing harm is not enough. You have to actually prevent harm being done by other people in an active way. And I think that's what the healthcare professionals aren't seeing as their role yet.
It's interesting because we've had organ trafficking laws in this country for between 15 to 20 years. I think when they were first drafted in the criminal code, we've never had a prosecution, and it's interesting that laws can sit there, and we've never had a prosecution at all for any organ trafficking offences. David, did you want to talk about what can happen a little bit more? I know you touched on the extraterritorial application, and interestingly, we have had prosecutions where we've had laws where people have gone overseas and committed sexual offences, because we have laws in this country where sexual offences have extraterritorial application, and people generally, those laws, they may not have been highly effective, but we have had prosecutions, and people generally know you can't get on a plane now and go and have sex with a child in an overseas country and think that you're not going to get prosecuted in Australia. I think generally most people would know that. So what else can we be doing legally in Australia, David?
Well, there is a problem with laws in a lot of countries that are on the books now that deal with organ trafficking, because they typically just limit themselves to human trafficking for the purpose of selling organs, so that it's what my colleague referred to as slavery. It's a modern form of slavery. It's the person that's moved around for the organ rather than the transplant tourist. And in fact, the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, which is a UN bureaucracy which is responsible for the protocol to the Treaty on Transnational Crime, the protocol on human trafficking, has said unequivocally that human trafficking in organs does not include organ trafficking. So that these laws that are in place now are deficient. They're not addressed to this problem, and that's why we need this whole set of laws. And that's what's happened in Europe. The Council of Europe developed this additional treaty, and I said that there was 13 countries that have now enacted this sort of legislation. Well, 11 of them are in Europe, and it really and the other two, well, are Taiwan and Israel. And we really need to get this spread around the world.
Thank you, David. I think generally people probably don't know that distinction, that there is a distinction between trafficking in persons for the removal of organs and for trafficking in human organs. And our laws are, and I would agree with what David has said, that our laws are deficient, and we are trying to deal with that at the moment, aren't we, Caroline? So over to you now. This is your opportunity. Now, before we do that, we're going to, JINTAO, would like to bring you up to the stage and join the panel, and we're going to get a chair for you. Oh, there's a spare one. There's one already there. JINTAO, if you could join the panel. Thank you. And we're going to try and bring OMIR back up as well, and we'll bring Fatima up on the stage.
Cindy, can you go translate for her?
I'll wait till Fatima comes up here, but I just want to thank OMIR for sitting patiently is it? Yeah, you can come here, Fatima, if you like. Yes, you can take centre stage. It's all you. You can be the chair, because it's over to the audience now. Oh, hello.
We'll be doing translation if needed, Mandarin and English translation.
Oh, okay, fantastic. So we have another translator, fantastic. So we've got another chair. So if you would like to take a chair, take a seat, not a chair, take a seat over there, fantastic. And Fatima, you can stay here. And Fatima, can you please just thank OMIR for me, and I'm sure probably for the audience, to say thank you for waiting so patiently. Could you just let him know that and to thank him?
Ömer'e mavu Madeline mushu faoliyatni o'rlashtirgan xonam bilan biz boshqa angliqchilar sizningki mushu yig'in jarayonida noiti savrchanlik bilan saqlab turganligingizga ko'pdan ko'p rahmat aytamiz.
Do you want to repeat that? Yeah.
So he also thanks all of us, and also the Australian government, United Nations, the European Union, and all the other governments who are working for the human rights, the breach of the human rights. He said the sun. He said the red flag of the CCP cannot cover the sun. So basically, yeah.
Thank you very much. So now over to the audience. Who would like to go first? Alex, hello. Great, we'll get a microphone for you there.
Hello. I just wonder, we heard from the China Tribunal that China is a criminal state, and I just would be interested in the panel's advice, and those obviously who've been through these horrific experiences directly. What would your advice be to business, to Australian businesses, given we know many Australian companies have operations in China, work directly with partners over there, and particularly given we know the number of state-owned enterprises in China is enormous, what would your advice be to Australian businesses working in China?
Yes, well, I would say that avoid complicity, provide information, try to communicate as much as possible, take advantage of the context, observe, listen, report. China was at one time a hermit kingdom with no connection with the rest of the world, and we've seen countries like that, North Korea, Albania under Soviet rule, and just a total boycott itself is not necessarily going to end human rights violations in China. In fact, it may make them more acute with the isolation. But I think what we have to do is take advantage of, we have to avoid, I would say, total ostracism with the transplant profession, but I don't think, in the transplant hospitals, but I don't think we have to have total ostracism of China. I think, on the contrary, we should be taking advantage of the context with China to find out, to communicate, to get people more aware of what they themselves cannot find out because they're under this kind of censorship cover-up ban in China.
If I can briefly add to that. So in the context of due diligence and doing preliminary human rights risk assessments, obviously the Modern Slavery Act provides an opportunity there because basically so many goods that are sourced from China due to it being, an authoritarian state are very likely in some way linked to human rights abuses, whether that's organ harvesting or something else. So I think the Modern Slavery Act, it's sort of lacking teeth in a way that it's only let's say a transparency act, but it does force companies to look at, okay, well, where do I get my goods from, whether that is, well, anything really, and map the human rights abuses that you might be complicit in effectively. So I think that as long as companies keep on doing that, and that might mean that some companies might pull out their business from China, and obviously, economic pain is something that ultimately that is felt by any country. So that could be one of the tools to try and change behavior.
I think the recent Four Corners revelation and then the following actions of Target and Cotton On and a number of other companies in relation to cotton, we work a lot with the fashion industry, and it's certainly, China was kind of regarded as a low-risk place, particularly if you had a fully integrated factory, so you knew what was happening from beginning to end. That's changed now.
Thank you. Next question. And what we might do, if it's okay, I'm going to get Fatima to interpret the question in case Amir would like to join in and answer, if that's okay. Next question. Yes. Have you? Let's get you a microphone, sir.
Unfortunately, the former Prime Minister of this country, Paul Keating, who I believe is a very bad man, recently called Communist China, quote, a great state. What can we do with these kind of influential people broadcasting these kind of opinions, especially in the Australian political world?
Okay, thank you. We'll just, Fatima, if you can translate and then we'll open.
Ömer akam yerde bir sual keldi. Avstraliyaniki burunqi nemisi baş ministri aşı Xitoy davlatining aytdi isil bir davlat deb ta'riflab ekan. Shuning qarta biz nomishda kuchlik undaq siyosiy yo'llarningki aşı Xitoy bilan bo'lgan munosabatda qanday rol o'ynaydiganligiga qanday qaraysiz degan bir savol keldi. Va hammalarga keldi, siz javob bersangiz bo'ldi.
Okay, so Wendy, I think Amir might want to say.
Siz javob bersangiz bo'ldi. Siyosiy yo'llarningki, kuchlik siyosiy yo'llarningki Xitoy davlati bilan bo'lgan shu munosabatga bo'lgan ko'z qarashidan bizga ko'rsatgan ta'sir haqida. Okay, he thinks that the powerful people and the states, they mainly cover all the crimes of China, mainly because of the financial benefits, the economic benefits, and it's just only the people like us who are into humanity, who is doing the humanitarian work, so we are the people speaking up against the crimes and
Thank you. And Wendy, did you want to respond?
My response was much along the same lines, that we need to follow the money. Why is Paul Keating standing up for China? Well, what are Paul Keating's financial interests and how do they link to China? This is where we need the media.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've got 2 questions down here, so we could just grab a... So we've got you, sir, there, and sir, you're next. Yeah.
Greetings. Every monster has its Achilles heel. We, as consumers in Australia, a very high percentage, maybe even 80 or 90% of the small products you buy in shops are made in China. Is it possible to, one, make Australian consumers aware of the circumstances under which these goods are manufactured, thus having an effect on the saleability of those products amongst Australian consumers, thus effectively starting a chain reaction which might result in a boycott of Chinese goods amongst Australian consumers? And secondly, far more difficult, but with high tech, I'm not an IT boy myself, very much way back, but is it possible, because Chinese workers make the goods which we consume, and because the kind of goods they make for us in our market are things which they are not familiar with in their own culture, they might be curious about what those goods are and what kind of culture would want to consume them? Can we, in some subliminal way, get to the minds of those Chinese manufacturing workers in factories and make them, in some subliminal way, this is something for IT people, aware of the nature of their own regime, thus getting at the guts and marrow of the Chinese regime through its workers?
Thank you very much. So I think what I've picked up from there is 2 things about how we can make consumers more aware about the products and where they're coming from, and also around mindset and how we think about things. I've just been told that we've gone over a little bit over time. So what we'll do is we'll just answer that question quite quickly, and then we'll have a final question here, unless someone's got a burning question. I mean, you're sitting there, and if you're happy to stay, I mean, will we get kicked out of Parliament? I can see a hand there. How about you could be our... Oh, okay, people are happy to stay. So if you're happy to stay, that's fine. But what we'll do is we'll keep the questions short, if that's okay, and the answers equally as short and to the point. And unless you think Amir wants to answer something, we can translate. But just let him know he doesn't need to answer that necessarily. Is there anyone on the panel who wants to answer that question? Now, we might save Amir for maybe the next question. Of course, we'll translate, though, in case he wants to. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Consumer education around supply chains is absolutely crucial for ending all kinds of abuse.
Great. Thank you. Do you think Amir... Yeah, you think Amir will be fine. Sir, we'll just get you a microphone. We got a microphone. Oh, we've got 2 coming down. You're in the middle there, sir, so you get either end. Take your pick. Oh, there we go. That's called audience participation.
Thank you. First of all, I'll introduce myself quickly. My name is Ganesh Loke, and I was the United Australia Party candidate from Parramatta, and I have spoken at a couple of rallies for FALUN Dafa. I have 2-tier question, one for the international community and regarding...
Okay, but I'm going to get you to do it really quickly and succinctly, because it's usually one question policy, but, you know, I'll be kind. But can you just keep it really quick and brief? Thank you.
Why not international communities doing anything, like, for example, in against South Africa, if you remember, when there was racism and things, India and a couple of countries boycotted to play with them. Why can't we stop China or Chinese athletes coming for Olympics? Why? Because we can see all these things happening openly. That's one question. And then second thing, for the Australian government, it was our... it's nothing to do with the party, but we also advertise in a couple of things. The Chinese government is trying to buy lands here. They own a couple of airports in Australia. Why can't Australian government is doing anything? And the third thing is about
Oh no! Now you're really pushing your luck. No. Right, no. I'm going to be really strict. You've done well. That was very clever. I like to do things in 3 as well, but I'll stop you there. Anyone on the panel, and we might also want to see about this for Emir, actually, about that question, because it obviously is an important question. So I'm not minimising your question in any way. Anyone on the panel?
Yeah, so look, I think it's a really big question you ask, and it has so many sort of geopolitical, aspects to it. Like, why don't you boycott them? And obviously, we currently see the, athletes, but we currently see the trade war between the US and China and all sort of the ramifications that has. And I think that, there are definitely some very straightforward actions that governments could take in order to sort of penalize this type of behavior, but it's not happening because of all those sort of, geopolitical maneuverings. But what exactly is happening behind the curtain is unclear to me, as it is probably to most people. So I think that, China is just a very powerful country. It's the workshop of the world. So, you drew a parallel with South Africa. I think just that what South Africa contributed to the world economy at the time of apartheid was a drop in a bucket compared to China. So that's like, so it's a very, very tough question that I don't think anyone really has a direct answer to. It's really...
Well, I think you've answered it very well,
Okay, well,
Martijn. Yes.
I'll leave it there.
No, yeah. Wendy, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add an observation from my interactions with the international transplant community, particularly the Transplantation Society, and they seemed to have a carrot and stick approach initially, saying to the Chinese transplant community, well, you can't present at our conferences, we won't publish your papers if you are taking organs from executed prisoners. And so then China made a lot of noise and claimed it was going to reform. And the Transplant Society said, great, come to our conferences, be keynote speakers at our conferences, sit next to the head people at the table and so on. So all of the stick went away, the carrot was gobbled down, and I think the Transplant Society along with the carrot. And I think we really need to understand that if we want to make human rights gains in China, they're going to be slow, they're going to be incremental, and they have to be properly verified at every step. So it's a very, very challenging situation.
Okay, thank you very much. I've been told that we can really only have one more question. I'm very sorry, Nicole, because this woman here, and I'm very sorry, John, you're the final question, so it better be good. No pressure at all. Can we get this woman here a microphone, please? And then we are going to have to wind up.
I'll try to make it quick. So the panel was speaking earlier about the challenges and barriers that come with putting an end to organ harvesting in China, especially that it's a rising superpower. What parallels and what differences do you think exist with challenging human rights abuses conducted by Western powers, especially the US?
Okay, I think what we'll do is we will interpret that question. Did you grab that, Fatima? Yeah, because I think... So the panel can have a think about it, but I think I'd like OMIR to also contribute to that question if he wants to.
Ömer akam yerde bir ameylengi sual çıktı, eğer cevap berginiz olmasa cevap bermesiniz buldu. Bu yerde bir kızcaqtaydı, şu insan haklarınınki buzg'unchilik uchrashi faqat Xitoylar qilayotgan ish emas. Masalan, g'arb davlatlardan, masalan, Amerika shuni qilyotidi. Bunga nisbatan biz qanday qarashimiz kerak degan savol tushdi. Agar javob bergingiz kelsa, javob bersangiz bo'ldi. Yeah. He said it's not just China who is breaching the human rights, but it's also, he has been living in Europe for 8 months and he's already seen some kind of discriminations. So in his opinion, it's not just China, but pretty much every superpowers or strong countries are doing that. It's mainly because the organizations like us are not strong enough to change the politics or change the people's mind. Whether it's happening in Palestine or somewhere else, it's the human rights breach is human rights breach. It's not just, the China or whoever does it. It is still a crime. Yeah.
Yes, David.
Yeah, I think it's important to avoid false symmetries. There are, of course, human rights violations in every country, but they're not the same in every country. And we don't see anywhere else in the world this state institutionalized mass killing of prisoners of conscience for their organs. That is unique to China. There's a lot of human rights dialogues with China, and typically that's what the Chinese say, that the countries will bring up organ transplant abuse, and then Chinese will say, well, but what about the Aboriginals in Australia and so on? And sure, there's these problems, but I think to say, well, that we're all guilty and we're all doing something wrong is avoiding the real issue we're trying to face here, which is ending organ transplant abuse in China, which doesn't exist anywhere else.
Yes, thank you, David. To conclude, before I just do my brief concluding remarks, Jintao, I have one question which I would like to ask you, which is, what do you think people need to do? What do you think are the next steps? What the people in the audience here who've come here, taken time out of their evening to come here, maybe here sitting thinking, what can I do, or what has to happen next? As someone who has survived what you have survived, could you share with us what you think we should all be doing?
So the suggestion from Falun Gong practitioners is that I think we need to, ideally, everyone go to talk about this to anyone you can talk with, and deeply expose this crime. When more and more people know about this and understand it thoroughly, then everyone will come up with their own ideas, their own ways to help do something.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank our speakers, our sponsors, but most of all, I would like to thank you for coming here, for being open, and for listening to our speakers and to the stories. Please go forth and remember always, speak out and never be silent. Thank you very much for coming.